The night was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the chill of autumn air. A full moon hung low in the sky, casting pale light over the sprawling fields, the golden wheat now a dim silhouette against the horizon. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted a lonely sound, echoing time and again, as if it too sensed the tension brewing in the shadows. Inside a weathered barn nestled near a rustic farmhouse, old farmer Joe reclined on a wooden stool, lost in thought. His rough hands were calloused and cracked, a testament to years spent working the earth. A flickering lantern hung from a rafter, bathing his face in an orange glow, while hay scattered across the ground rustled gently with the breeze. Joe was a man of routine. Every day followed the last in a rhythm that only he knew. But tonight felt different. As he took a sip of his lukewarm coffee, a sharp sound pierced the night, a crash, sharp and jarring, echoing through the stillness. Joe's heart pounded as he leapt to his feet, the stool clattering behind him. He peered through the slats of the barn, his chest tightening with a mix of dread and determination. The silhouette of a figure loomed near the edge of his property, a shadow darting among the rows of corn. Someone was here, and they weren't here for a friendly visit. In a flash, the lessons of his youth surged through his mind. His dad had always said, "Never leave your door unlocked, Joe, not in this world." As he moved quietly across the barn floor, he felt the weight of that wisdom settle onto his shoulders. He could feel the urge to panic rising, clawing at him, but he pushed it back. This was his land, his life. He would protect it. With careful movements, he pulled on his boots, grabbed an old baseball bat he kept propped against the wall, and crept toward the barn door. Just outside, the shadows thickened, and two figures, tall, cloaked in darkness, now stood at the barn's entrance, whispering among themselves. Their breath fogged in the cold air, a signal of their disregard for the chill that clutched at the world around them. They were intruders, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. Joe's heart raced, but his mind was sharp. These weren't just ordinary thieves. They had an air of malice about them, an edge that indicated they were in for more than a petty theft. A flicker of coyotes howling in the distance sent a shiver through him. He couldn't simply confront them head-on. He had to have a plan. He edged back into the barn, out of sight but close enough to hear their murmurs. The words caught in the cool night air, the sound of metal tools clinking, a rope being unfurled. They had come for something more than just chickens or a tractor. Outside, the larger of the two lobbed a flurry of angry words, his voice an ugly scrape against the stillness. "You think this patch of land belongs to you?" The menace in his tone sent a visceral prickle down Joe's spine. Fear had its grip on him, urging him to flee, but instead he stood his ground. In the dim light of the barn, another idea sparked in his mind. Joe glanced at the shelf scattered with old tools, each a relic of a different era. He picked up a metal wrench, its weight reassuring in his hand. He had spent years facing storms, droughts, and the occasional wild animal, and this was just another challenge to overcome. He crouched down to the ground, listening intently. The intruders were now inside the barn, rummaging through his belongings, their voices low and sinister. "This place will be ours soon enough. Just imagine the money we can make," one of them said, the delight in his tone making Joe's stomach churn. They were planning something wicked, and time was running short. With adrenaline coursing through his veins, Joe moved silently across the barn floor, making sure his footsteps hardly made a sound against the dusty boards. It was now or never. These two had underestimated him, and he was about to turn the tables. Pushing aside a tacky curtain of hay bales, he found a back door that led outside. He swung it open slowly, the creaking hinge sounding like thunder in such a quiet night. The intruders didn't hear a thing, their focus entirely consumed by looting. Joe planted his feet firmly, breathed in through his nose, and prepared to make his move. When he stepped out into the night, the cool breeze washed over him, sharpening his senses. His heart hammering against his ribs, focused and steady, he crept up behind them. There they were, illuminated by the harsh light of a flashlight they had brought along, distracted by valuables they were shoving into their bags. Joe's voice rang out, deep and commanding, echoing off the barn walls. The intruders whipped around, surprise knocking their breath away as Joe swung the wrench with all his might. It made a dull thud, connecting directly with the larger man's shoulder. He He staggered back, pain blooming on his face, and instinct kicked in for the other one. In a mad scramble for escape, they shoved past him, darting toward the barn door, but they weren't fast enough. Joe, fueled by raw fury and adrenaline, lunged forward, blocking their exit. They were cornered. Fear distorted their faces now, transforming plans of theft into frantic desperation. Joe's resolve hardened. They had barged into his sanctuary. They were not going to leave unscathed. The men scrambled, pushed each other aside, trying to find an alternate route. The smaller one, now trying to make a break for the side exit, slipped in the chaos. He hit the floor with a loud thud, the flashlight rolling out of his grasp and illuminating the dust motes floating in the air. Joe was on him in an instant, wrench raised high, a warrior in the heat of battle. He shouted, his voice rough and unyielding. The power in his words resonated between the barn walls, a barrier of strength that enveloped him. As the larger man attempted to regroup, Joe turned his attention back to the smaller one pinned by the ground. He could see panic rising in his eyes, and while the scene was intoxicating, there was something deeper stirring inside Joe. They were misguided, reckless, but they were also human. He took a deep breath and forced himself to ease back, not letting the terror fully consume him. "I don't want to hurt you," he said, his voice suddenly steady and calm, yet carrying the weight of a storm. The man's eyes widened in surprise, perhaps not expecting such a turn in tone. It was a thin line he was walking, balancing between savage anger and merciful restraint. But Joe knew what he had to do. "You think this place is easy. You think it's all treasures and riches." For just a moment, time hung in suspended animation. Both men froze, suspended between fear and understanding. The larger intruder hesitated as well, his resolve shaken by the weight of Joe's words hanging in the air. "Let's talk," Joe urged, lowering his wrench slightly. "You don't have to choose this path." The words flowed naturally, filled with a certain wisdom that only years in the struggle could bring. The men, eyes darting between Joe and each other, exchanged bewildered glances. Could this be an escape? Would they find a way out of their predicament without more violence? The tension in the barn reached its boiling point, an emotional crescendo as Joe stood resolute, ready to protect everything he held dear while also offering a glimmer of hope to two lost souls, the choice to change their course. As the minutes stretched, the adrenaline slowly faded, revealing the heart of the matter. While fear had brought them to his threshold, understanding could lead them away. In this quiet standoff, Joe realized not just the power of strength, but the strength of compassion. The older criminal took a step back, his shoulders sagging as he glanced at his partner, both a little shaken and a lot confused. Joe lowered his tool completely, signaling that maybe tonight wouldn't end with violence. Maybe there was a chance they could shift paths. Sometimes, life had a way of forcing choices, but sometimes it offered a loving hand instead. And just like that, amid the darkness, a glimmer of humanity flickered in that old barn. The full moon continued to beam over the world outside, illuminating the path of redemption that lay ahead, not only for those two intruders, but for everyone longing for a way out of their own darkness. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the darkness like a strobe light, followed by an earth-shaking rumble of thunder that vibrated through the air. The storm was fierce and unforgiving, tearing through the land like a wild beast. Just outside a weathered barn, the rain pelted down, drumming on the roof like angry fists. Inside, old man Bill McGregor sat hunched over an old wooden table, replaying the day's events in his mind. At 72 years old, Bill had weathered many storms, both literal and metaphorical. The barn was his sanctuary, filled with tools and memories, but tonight it felt different. A sense of unease fluttered deep in his gut, tightening like a vice. He glanced out the small, grimy window. Shadows danced among the trees, flickering in the sporadic bursts of lightning. "Get a grip, Bill," he muttered to himself, shaking his head. He could almost hear his wife Martha's voice echoing in his mind, urging him to pay attention. Always pay attention. Just then, the tranquility shattered. A loud crash echoed through the night, sharp and jarring, breaking through the symphony of rain. Bill's heart raced as he bolted to his feet, adrenaline flooding his veins. He knew that sound all too well. It was the unmistakable noise of someone smashing through his barn door. Without a second thought, Bill darted toward the back of the barn. heart pounding like a war drum. He'd always believed in being prepared. Over the years, he had gathered supplies and equipment for every possible scenario. He had heard rumor stories whispered among neighbors about people prowling rural areas at night. Bill always dismissed those tales as overhyped scaremongering, until now. As he reached the wall at the back, he felt around for the baseball bat he'd stored there for emergencies. His fingers wrapped around the smooth wood and a surge of confidence washed over him. He took a deep breath, centering himself. It was time to put years of preparation to the test. Bill crept towards the barn's entrance, moving cautiously and deliberately. The sound of voices, low and conspiratorial, drifted toward him. "Get that tractor," one of them barked. The gravity in that voice sent a chill racing down Bill's spine. They were serious. It was more than theft. They wanted his livelihood. He took a moment to gather himself, stepping deeper into the shadows. He could feel the pulse of his heart in his ears, drowning out the storm outside. In this precarious moment, time seemed to stretch indefinitely, each second filled with a heavy weight. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he composed his next move. Without a moment's hesitation, he lunged from the shadows, swinging the bat with all the force he had. It connected with the first intruder who hadn't seen him coming. The man crumpled to the ground, a shocked expression frozen on his face. Cried the second man, turning wide-eyed toward the commotion. Panic set in, and he stumbled backward, searching for an escape route. Bill saw the fear in his eyes, the way it mirrored his own emotions. Yet there was no time for mercy now. Bill shouted, voice booming like thunder. The intensity of his yell echoed along the barn walls, reverberating in the night air. The second intruder froze for a heartbeat, but then he turned and bolted for the back exit. Bill followed him, a whirlwind of determination and anger. They raced through the barn, the thunder outside drowning out the chaos within. Bill was fueled by adrenaline and righteous indignation. At the back door, the intruder cursed under his breath, grappling frantically with the latch. With one fierce swing, Bill caught up to him, swinging the bat again. This time the man dodged and made for the side exit, slipping outside into the deluge of rain. Bill chased him, the storm now a backdrop to a primal confrontation. The grass beneath Bill's feet was slick, and he nearly lost his footing, but he pressed on. The intruder stumbled in the dark, silhouetted against the flickering lightning, and Bill could sense his fear. It was palpable, almost intoxicating. The intruder reached the fence, hands grasping frantically as he tried to climb over. Bill yelled, the rawness of his voice echoing through the night. But the man was blinded by desperation, and with a final push, he hurled himself over the fence, landing with a dull thud on the other side before sprinting into the thick darkness of the woods. Breathing heavily, Bill stood still for a moment, assessing the chaos around him. The barn door lay splintered, swinging on its hinges, and an eerie silence settled in, followed only by the sound of rain cascading from the sky. He turned back to the barn, where the first intruder lay unconscious on the ground, a tangled mass of limbs and fear. Bill wondered, anxiety creeping back in. His heart raced as he picked himself up and quickly moved toward the man. He could still feel adrenaline coursing through his veins, the high of confrontation mixed with the reality of the situation. He had fought back, and it was exhilarating, yet a tinge of regret pricked at the edges of his mind. They were just men, lost and desperate. Bending down, Bill checked the intruder's pulse, steady but quick. This was not a monster. This was a man caught in a storm of his own making. He couldn't leave him there. Bill would never forgive himself if he did. He hurried back inside the barn to retrieve a few supplies. In the corner, he had an old first aid kit tucked away, something he had gathered for times when the farm's members got cut or bruised, but never for confronting intruders. He grabbed it and returned outside, rain soaking into his clothes as he crouched beside the man. With each movement, Bill saw the pillaged items strewn across the barn floor: the tractor, farming tools, years of work reduced to nothing in the blink of an eye. But as he pressed a cold cloth against the intruder's bruised forehead, he felt a twinge of empathy. Here was a man whose desperation had driven him into this bleak night. "Wake up," Bill urged softly, tapping the man's cheek. "I won't hurt you." After what felt like an eternity, the intruder stirred, eyes fluttering open to meet Bill's gaze. "What?" He stammered, confusion washing over his features. "You're safe. Just breathe," Bill replied, his voice steady and calm. He could see the fight drain from the man's posture, the way fear morphed into something softer, more vulnerable. "Tom," came the weak reply, trembling hands clutching the grass beneath him. "Tom," Bill echoed, feeling the man's humanity resonating through the storm. "You don't have to live like this. You can turn back." Across the man's face, a flicker of doubt ignited. "This was all I could do. I'm desperate. For my family, I didn't want to hurt anyone." Bill could feel the walls of his hardened heart begin to crumble. He had lived alone for years since Martha passed, but he always knew the value of community. "Everyone has moments of desperation," he said softly, "but you have options." Tom asked, tears glistening in his eyes. "Let me help you," Bill replied, surprising himself with the fervor of his words. Here he stood, once a farmer solely for his land, but now, perhaps he could be more, a guide for someone else lost in their storm. With a trembling breath, Tom nodded slowly, the tension in his frame unwinding. Bill helped Tom to his feet, steadying him as the rain continued to fall around them, a veil of healing energy in that stormy night. The barn lay behind them, a battleground transformed, shadows receding as light began to seep into the cracks. Together, they made their way back into the barn. Bill knew there would be calls to make, police reports to file, a long road ahead. But for now, there in the eye of the storm stood an unexpected connection formed from fear and compassion. In the end, it wasn't just about protection or preparation. It was about reaching out in dark times, reminding a fellow soul that there was always room for hope, even amid the thunder and rain. On that night, as the storm passed and dawn broke on the horizon, Bill wouldn't just see Tom as an intruder. He would see a new beginning for both of them, forged through the tempest, where kindness became their beacon to brave the storms ahead, side by side. The thunder rolled across the sky like a freight train, dark clouds swirling ominously overhead. As the rain began to trickle down, drenched in the eerie hush of the approaching storm, the world felt like it was holding its breath. Just outside a weathered barn, farmer Ted Winters was hard at work, making the final checks before the tempest hit. An experienced farmer at 55, Ted had seen his share of storms, both in nature and in life. But tonight, it wasn't just the raging winds or the lashing rain that worried him. He had heard whispers of trouble. Something was brewing in the dark corners of the nearby town, a shadow that hung over the good folks like a dark cloud, reports of intruders preying on farms, thieves willing to do anything to get what they needed. With the warning bells ringing in his ears, Ted had taken measures. While friends made jokes about his paranoia, he knew better. He had fortified the barn and sharpened his eyes. The tools he kept had a dual purpose now. They were not just to tend to crops, but also to protect what he had built. Just as he locked the barn door, a loud crash resonated through the night, vibrating through the ground beneath him. Adrenaline surged, compelling him into action. He whipped around, heart pounding in his chest like a wild drum. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of a force breaking into his sanctuary, a shattering noise that set his instincts ablaze. "Stay calm," he whispered to himself, taking a breath as he reached for the heavy iron wrench that hung over his workbench. It felt cool and solid in his grip. The echoes around him morphed into a feral tension. Shadows flickered. He could hear rustling inside the barn, the unmistakable scurry of desperate hands rummaging through his tools. Ted crept toward the door, every step calculated. His world had been a choreographed dance with nature, and now it was transitioning into something primal. With the wrench in hand, he pushed open the door just a crack and peered inside. Moonlight filtered through the gaps. He could make out the outlines of two figures, tall and lean, as they rummaged through his equipment. "Damn it," he muttered, gripping the handle tighter. This was not just theft. It was a violation, an attack on the life he had built with grit and sweat. The sight touched a nerve deep within him, igniting that raw, protective energy lurking at his core. Gathering his strength, he kicked the barn door wide open with a confident swing. "Hey!" he shouted, voice steady and resolute, echoing off the barn walls. The intruders froze mid-movement, heads snapping toward him, surprise and fear mingling in their eyes. The men exchanged nervous glances, caught off guard. "We just need some tools, man." The taller one replied, raising his hands in a half-hearted gesture of surrender. There was something about their tone, a false bravado that reeked of fear. Ted could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, a rush that turned the air heavy and electric. Not happening. The other man, shorter and wiry, took a step back, his foot scuffing against a wooden crate and sending it crashing to the ground. It was like slow motion. Ted's mind raced, calculating, replaying the possible scenarios in a frantic loop. These men didn't know what they were dealing with. The tall one warned, but Ted saw desperation glistening in their eyes, the fear of being caught, the scent of panic. He realized there was no reasoning with them. Desperation had rendered them unpredictable. He tightened his grip on the wrench, stepping further into the barn, embodying the calm in the eye of the storm. "I'll give you one last chance to leave peacefully." As the words left his lips, he could see a flicker of doubt dance across the intruders' faces. For a heartbeat, the world went silent, as if nature itself stopped to listen. Then the taller man mustered up what remained of his bravado. He shouted, lunging toward the back exit. The moment shattered like glass. Bill turned just in time to see the shorter man dart for the side door. His body moved instinctively. He wasn't about to let them escape. Lurching forward, he swung the wrench, catching the taller man across the back as he stumbled out. The intruder fell with a strangled cry, panic painted across his features, but Ted wasn't finished. In a frenzy, he turned toward the other man, who hesitated at the door, torn between fleeing and fighting. Ted growled. He wasn't playing games. He was willing to protect what was his at any cost. "Let me go," the shorter intruder pleaded, his voice a shaky whisper. Ted could see the fear, raw and unfiltered, reflecting in the man's eyes. Ted shot back, "But I'm not your solution." Each word dripped with a simmering intensity, pushing tense air between them. As the struggle unfolded, decisions swarmed like bees in Bill's head. Was it wrong to value his crops, his life, over the desperation of these men? He could feel the adrenaline begin to wane, giving way to a lingering sense of confusion. The shorter man, catching his breath, began to reconsider, his fear morphing into a frantic realization. "We just need food, money." He gestured, each word punctuated with that urgent clarity, and that tore at Ted's heart. How many nights had he worried about losing everything he had worked for? He had been on his own since his wife passed away, and the loneliness often felt crippling, but he had found resilience in his roots. Couldn't these men find the same strength? Bill's thoughts spilled into a torrent of emotions, compassion battling the urge to defend every inch of what he had cultivated over decades. He challenged, heart racing. "I've lost far too much." The taller man, groaning as he pulled himself up, met Ted's gaze with a hint of shame. Ghostly remnants of guilt flashed across his face. "We didn't want this." Ted interrupted sharply. He stepped forward, wrench still in hand, but lowering it slightly, a sign of tentative truce. "Please." The shorter one insisted, his voice shaky, eyes wide. "I'm sorry." Silence filled the barn once again, broken only by the sound of rain lashing against the barn roof. The air was thick with tension, a suffocating weight that threatened to pull them all down. Ted's heart hammered in his chest, but clarity pierced through his chaos. He had been given a choice to respond with anger or to reach for understanding. He asked, his voice firm yet somehow softer. "Jake," said the shorter one, still trembling. "Brandon," muttered the taller man, avoiding eye contact. "Listen," Ted said, voice steady. "I understand the struggle, but there's a better way. You want to provide for your families, I can help." He held their gaze, the weight of his words settling around them. Jake asked, hope flickering like a fragile candle in a tempest. "You need to leave this life behind. No more stealing, work with me instead. I need help on the farm and there's always work to be done. I can teach you, show you what real work is." For a moment, the barn was utterly silent, a palpable pause as both men processed his offer. Doubt loomed in their eyes, but so did a flicker of hope. Brandon asked, his voice softening. "Yes," Ted replied, "but you have to agree to it. No tricks, no more stealing. You work hard and I'll share what I have. There's a barn full of tools, things I have gathered for years." Jake and Brandon exchanged glances, uncertainty still shadowing their faces, but the fear began to soften, edged out by a promise of redemption. "We don't know anything about farming," Jake said slowly, hesitation evident in his voice. Then we'll start from square one, Ted affirmed with determination. You'll learn just like I did. A crop doesn't grow overnight. It takes time and patience. Over time, the rain switched from a torrential downpour to a gentle patter, and in that moment, Ted glimpsed something more than just vulnerability in those men. There was a new purpose, a chance for healing amid broken paths twisted by desperation. Okay, Brandon finally said, looking back at Ted. The relief surged within Ted like the sunlight breaking through the clouds. He lowered the wrench completely, extending a hand toward them. As they clasped hands, a tentative connection formed amid the remnants of chaos, raw humanity binding them together at that moment. The barn stood around them, once a site of conflict, now a beacon of second chances, a place where fear morphed into hope, and desperation could sprout into new beginnings. Tonight, they had weathered the storm together, and in the unfolding days ahead, Farmer Ted would not only cultivate the land he loved, but also teach Jake and Brandon how to cultivate their futures one seed, one lesson at a time. In this unexpected partnership, they would transform from intruders to allies, proving that even in the darkest of nights, new paths could light the way forward. The wind howled through the open fields, a mournful cry that echoed into the darkening sky. Clouds swirled like a restless sea overhead, and as night fell, an eerie hush settled over the farmland, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. Deep in the heart of this quiet landscape, old farmer Henry Hartman was sealing the last hay bales in his barn. The barn, a sturdy structure weathered by the years, was his fortress and his livelihood. Every wooden beam told a story, every creak of the floorboards whispered memories of hard work and dedication. But tonight, as the storm approached, Henry felt an unsettling tension hanging in the air, a sense of foreboding that crawled up his spine. He peered out the small window, watching as the first droplets of rain splattered across the parched earth. Something bad was brewing, not just the storm, but something darker. He had heard rumors in town, whispers of a gang prowling rural areas, breaking into barns, taking whatever they could, and he had prepared. Henry was no stranger to trouble. He knew the value of being ready. That mantra had guided him for years, and tonight it rang in his ears like a mantra. As the wind picked up, rattling the windows, he retrieved a small pistol from a hidden shelf in the barn, along with a heavy flashlight. It was time to secure his territory. Beneath the dust and hay, he kept a serious stack of useful tools. Among them, not only farming implements but also a few surprises. He had repurposed a long-handled shovel into a formidable weapon, making sure his edges were sharp and ready. Just then, the night was shattered by a thunderous crash. The barn door, reinforced but not impenetrable, buckled under the weight of two intruders bursting through. The sound reverberated through the air, a deafening cacophony that sent adrenaline coursing through Henry's veins. He gripped his flashlight tightly, his heart racing as he ducked behind a stack of hay bales, the beam casting wild shadows across the barn. One of the intruders hissed, their voices low and urgent. Henry strained to see their faces, adrenaline blurring the edges of his vision. He could see the figures moving about, silhouetted against the low light, their movements frantic as they looted his sanctuary. Feeling a surge of determination, Henry took a deep breath to steady himself. He wasn't just going to let them take what he had worked for, he was going to confront them. As he stepped out from behind the hay bales, he heard one intruder call out, "What if he's here?" Panic seeped into their voices. Henry's grip tightened on the flashlight, illuminating the barn as he stepped into view. "You picked the wrong barn," he growled, his voice low yet resonant, filled with authority. The intruders froze, eyes wide, caught off guard. One of them stammered, taking a cautious step back. "I'm the man who owns this place," Henry replied, his voice steady. The second intruder sneered, glancing nervously at his partner. "We just want what's ours." Before they could respond, Henry lunged forward, the flashlight swinging like a pendulum of justice. The beam struck the first intruder square in the eyes, blinding him temporarily. With quick reflexes, Henry lunged forward, swinging the shovel in a fierce arc. It connected with the intruder's leg, sending him sprawling to the ground with a howl of pain. The second intruder hesitated for a split second, his bravado melting away in the face of unexpected resistance. He shouted, turning back to escape, but in that moment of panic he tripped over the first man's flailing body. Henry felt a rush of triumph but remained focused. He had to end this. "You think this is a game? You think you can just waltz in here and take what's mine?" The second intruder scrambled to his feet, murky fear crossing his features as he reached for something in his pocket. Henry's eyes narrowed as the man revealed a knife, gleaming wickedly in the dim barn light. Terror shot through him, yet he felt an even stronger surge of energy. "Put it down!" Henry shouted, raising the flashlight like a shield. The men were cornered, but they didn't seem ready to back down. As the intruder lunged forward with the knife, Henry swung the shovel again, catching him across the chest with a blow hard enough to send him staggering backward. He landed on a wooden crate that shattered under his weight, spitting hay and scattered grain into the air. Amid the chaos, Henry's mind raced. He had spent years preparing for something like this, stocking his barn, not just with farming tools, but with the knowledge that you had to protect what you love. But even so, the sheer fear of the encounter rattled him like a storm. The first intruder, finally recovering, struggled to his feet, their bravado gone. Pain radiated from his leg, and the frightened glances he shared with his partner told Henry all he needed to know. They were no longer thieves, but scared men caught in a web of their own choices. The first man pleaded, breathing hard. It was the desperation in his voice that struck the deepest chord with Henry. He wasn't just dealing with intruders, he was facing desperate individuals driven to extremes. The panic in his own heart softened a little, but the threat was still real. "Then leave now." Henry could see uncertainty creeping into their eyes. They had underestimated him, convincing themselves that he was just an old farmer. Time to put that notion to rest. "Let me help you," he said suddenly, his voice shifting to a more mellifluous tone. "You're not in a good place, I can see that. You don't have to go down this road." Silence fell over the barn. The rain outside pounded like a war drum, and for a fleeting moment, a hint of hesitance ignited in the air. They glanced at each other, exchanging silent calculations about their next move. "You think we can just walk away?" The second intruder spat back, trying to maintain a facade of aggression. Faith in humanity's resilience had always been a delicate thread intertwined in Henry's heart. He felt something shift inside. He wanted to make a difference. How many times had he himself struggled to find food when work was scarce? He had been on the brink, could remember days when the uncertainty clawed at his stomach. "To survive around here," he said evenly, "you'll need more than desperation. You need to learn. I can teach you." Both men were breathing heavily, and slowly the edges of their resolve softened. The reality of their choices began to settle in like dust on the barn floor. One of them asked, curiosity grasping him like a vine. "Simple," Henry replied, pointing to the countless tools surrounding them. "You can help me repair this barn, plant crops, and even tend to animals. There's dignity in hard work meaning." It felt almost surreal. He was standing in his barn, offering a lifeline to the very people who had torn through his sanctuary. Jake and Brandon exchanged glances, the fear draining away while something deeper began to take root. Jake ventured, doubt still lingering in his tone. "Yes," Henry affirmed, hope fluttering in his chest. "But your past stays in the past." In the weight of stormy silence, understanding blossomed in their hearts. The storm outside raged on, but within the barn, something monumental shifted. Boundaries blurred as fear turned to trust, and the air began to hum with possibilities. "Okay," Brandon finally said, his voice a whisper almost swallowed by the wind. Teetering on the brink between chaos and order, Henry extended his hand. As they clasped hands, the initial confrontation faded, surrendering to this unexpected bond. The barn stood around them, no longer a site of conflict, but a space for growth, a foundation for redemption. The storm outside softened to a murmur, washed away by the growing light of connection between them. In those moments, Farmer Henry had gone from a victim to a mentor, turning intruders into allies. He knew now that something beautiful could emerge from even the darkest moments. Together, they would weather future storms, not just through protection but through unity. With faith and hard work, Henry and his unlikely partners would cultivate not just the land but their lives, one step at a time. And as the dawn broke, signaling new beginnings, Henry understood that sometimes, even in the wake of chaos, new paths could illuminate the way forward. Lightning split the sky in a blinding flash, illuminating the empty fields and the wooden barn that stood like a soldier against the oncoming storm. The wind howled, ushering in the darkness with a chilling embrace. Inside the barn, Farmer David Miller was knee-deep in hay, each strand a reminder of the long hours he'd poured into his life's work. But on this night, a feeling of unease crept beneath his skin, something he couldn't quite shake. Earlier that day, he had heard the hushed whispers in town. There were stories circulating about a gang of thieves prowling rural areas, breaking into homes and barns, stealing equipment, livestock, anything they could get their hands on. David prided himself on being self-sufficient, but even he couldn't ignore the grim reality that surrounded him. He had to prepare. He felt restless as he walked around, eyeing every tool and piece of equipment he owned. As the storm clouds thickened, he took a moment to check the barn's rear door, ensuring it was bolted. He had set up various traps and warnings, a sort of improvisational alarm system. He pushed through the barn and inspected the old farm equipment, making sure everything was in order. Tonight felt like it would test more than just the strength of the barn. Just then, a thunderous crash jolted him from his thoughts. David's heart dropped. The door. He dashed toward the back of the barn, adrenaline pumping through him like electricity. The storm outside intensified, but beneath the roar of thunder, he could hear voices low, menacing murmurs echoing through the dark. Just grab what you can, quick. He might come back, one voice urged, panic winding through the words. David's instincts kicked in. He had been raised on this farm, had learned the value of hard work and preparedness from his father. Don't let fear consume you, his father used to say. Tonight, those words resonated with clarity. He grabbed a sturdy pitchfork leaning against the wall, gripping it tightly. He had never imagined that he might need it for anything like this, but here he was. He took a deep breath, steadied himself, and inched closer to the barn entrance. Peeking through the slats, he noticed two figures rummaging through his belongings, their movements frantic and filled with urgency. David shouted, stepping into the dim light. The intruders froze, their eyes widening in shock. A more assertive figure quickly turned, and David felt a thrill of authority surge through him. The taller intruder laughed nervously. "We didn't think anyone was home." David tightened his grip on the pitchfork, heart pounding harder. "Tools that are mine." "Look, there's no need for violence," said the second man, eyes darting around like trapped animals. "We'll be out of here in no time." Before he could finish, David lunged forward, brandishing the pitchfork like a warrior prepared for battle. The first intruder jumped back, bumping into a stack of hay bales, causing them to tumble to the ground in a cloud of dust. He shouted, but panic gripped them both. In a moment of sheer instinct, David charged, his voice a low growl. "You think you can take what's mine and just walk away?" The taller man stumbled over his feet as David closed the gap, adrenaline blurring the lines between fear and resolve. In a frenzy, he lashed out with the pitchfork, narrowly missing the second intruder who dashed for the side door. Their desperation was rising, morphing into a chaotic scramble as the realization of being caught hit them. David yelled, determination filling him to the brim. He could see them edging toward the door, backs pressed against the wall, eyes wide with dread. He could taste victory, but he had to keep his cool. The larger man called out, voice shaky. David paused for a moment, the tension thick in the air. He could feel the weight of desperation sinking into his bones. It was painful. These men were clearly lost, driven to this by something more than mere greed. He could see the fear in their eyes, aching almost as much as the anger burning in his own. "Then leave," he shouted, his words laced with power as he stepped closer, moving with purpose. Suddenly, the smaller man lunged for the door, but David was quicker, blocking their way. Not so fast. With the pitchfork raised, David felt a flicker of possibility. Perhaps this moment could become something other than confrontation. He had spent years on this farm, fighting against nature, battling storms that tried to strip everything away. But this felt different. It felt human. The larger intruder urged, desperation threatening to crack his voice. We just need food. A flicker of understanding ignited within David. Yes, he knew the weight of desperation all too well. Just a few years back, he had faced crippling debt himself after a bad harvest. The struggle had made him feel like he was drowning, flailing without direction. Instead of throwing them out into the storm, what if he could offer them something better? "All right," David said, his voice now calm if not unyielding. "I'll help you, but it means you have to leave that life behind." The two men exchanged glances, confusion mingling with fear. David felt his heart race, his hope hanging in the balance. This was a chance, an opportunity to turn a negative moment into something transformative. "Work with me," he continued, lowering the pitchfork slowly. "I need help around the farm. There's plenty to do, and I'll pay you for your work. I know how tough things can get." The larger man blurted, eyebrows knitting together in disbelief. "You heard me," David replied, trying to find the right words. "The world can be rough, and trusting strangers isn't easy, but you don't have to go this route. Help me tend to this farm, learn what it takes to build something." The air hung heavy with uncertainty. David took a step back, hands out in a gesture of peace. He could see the hesitation in their eyes, the internal battle raging beneath the surface. The smaller man asked, clearly skeptical, "Because I know what it's like to feel backed into a corner. Life isn't just about survival, it's about community," David replied firmly. "And I refuse to let desperation dictate our choices." It took a moment, but slowly the tension began to ebb from their bodies. It was subtle but noticeable, a softening of rigid shoulders, a release of the breath they had been holding. The larger man nodded slowly. "You really mean it?" "Yes," David answered, sensing the shift. "But if we're going to do this, I need you to promise me one thing: no more stealing." After a long pause, the weight of the moment pressed around them. The taller man nodded slowly, the air heavy with unspoken acknowledgments. "All right, we'll do it." "Good," David said, relief washing over him. And just like that, the dynamic shifted. The barn, once a battlefield, transformed into a space of potential and growth. Rising to the challenge, David showed them how to tend to the land, plant seeds, and repair fences. Days turned into weeks, and as the sun rose higher in the sky, the three of them forged an unlikely friendship. They worked side by side, sweat dripping down their brows, laughter bubbling up amidst the toil, and they transformed the farm together. David found joy in mentoring, while Jake and Brandon redoubled their efforts, driven by an unyielding desire to build a better future. And as they planted corn and tilled the soil, they encountered each storm together. With every downpour, every challenging day, they leaned on each other, knowing they had each overcome their own battles. Yet it wasn't just the crops that grew. Their bond flourished too. Jake and Brandon began to understand that hard work brought pride, and slowly the guilt of their past slipped away, replaced by a sense of purpose they hadn't known before. Months later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they stood together looking out at what they had built. What started as a potential confrontation had blossomed into a partnership rooted in mutual respect and growth. "I can't believe how far we've come," Jake said, a smile lighting up his face. "We make a good team," David replied, feeling a swell of pride. He turned to them, the glow of the setting sun illuminating their faces. "You've worked hard, and I'm proud of you." Brandon nodded, his eyes glistening with gratitude. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, David felt the weight of the past lift. He knew that he had not only defended his land that night, but had also opened a door to redemption and restoration. The barn, once a place of fear, had transformed into a beacon of hope, a testament to resilience. In that moment, he understood that life's storms could be weathered, not just with strength and preparation, but with compassion and understanding. Together, they had not only cultivated a farm, but had sown the seeds of friendship, proving that sometimes, even the darkest nights could lead to the brightest dawns. With hard work, faith, and an open heart, they had become not just a farmer and his workers, but a harmonious family, ready to face whatever came next. And together, they would stand strong against any intruder who dared to threaten their newfound peace. The storm rolled in like a freight train, dark clouds swirling ominously overhead. A jagged flash of lightning illuminated the landscape for just a moment, revealing the silhouette of a lone barn nestled among sprawling fields. Inside that barn, old farmer Ben Carter was closing up for the night, his calloused hands busy tying down the last load of hay. He had spent a better part of his life building this farm from the ground up. With every nail driven into wood, every crop planted, he felt a part of the earth attach itself to his very soul. But recently, shadows had crept into his peaceful rural life, rumors of thieves invading farms, breaking in like wolves in the night. Tonight, they were closer than ever. Ben lifted his head, listening intently to the wind howling outside. It was a sound that usually comforted him, but tonight it felt different. It carried with it a sense of foreboding. He glanced around the barn, checking every tool, every piece of equipment he had stored away. It was time to ensure everything was secure. He had readied himself, not just for the storm, but for any trouble that might come knocking. The barn was fortified with extra locks, and he had even rigged some old cans to clatter together if anyone tried to sneak in. Instead of fear, he felt a simmering readiness bubbling beneath the surface. As the rain began to hammer down, he retrieved an old baseball bat from the corner, its weight reassuring in his hands. Just then, a loud crash echoed through the stormy night. The barn door, creaking under strain, burst open, flinging splinters into the air like confetti. 3 figures rushed inside, their dark clothes drenched from the pouring rain. Adrenaline shot through Ben. The moment had finally come. One of them shouted, a sense of urgency lacing his voice. Fear and desperation danced in their eyes as they began to rift through Ben's belongings. Ben stepped out from behind a stack of hay bales, heart pounding in his chest. He raised the bat, its smooth surface gleaming ominously in the low light. The intruders froze, their eyes widening in surprise. One of them exclaimed, his bravado wavering. "This is my farm," Ben growled, stepping forward, voice steady and commanding. The tallest of the 3 men glanced at his companions, assessing the situation. He said, hands lifted in a half-hearted gesture. "You're already in it," Ben replied tersely. He took a couple of steps toward them. "Listen, we just need some money," the second intruder pleaded, sarcasm dripping from his tone that masked the panic brewing underneath. An icy calm washed over Ben as he weighed his options. The adrenaline surged through him, and he could feel the heat of the moment loud in his ears. He had faced storms before, but this was an entirely different kind of battle. "Get out now," he warned, gripping the bat tighter. Suddenly, chaos erupted. The tallest man lunged at Ben with something glinting in his hand, a knife. In that split second, time seemed to slow. Ben's instincts kicked into gear. He swung the bat with all his might, connecting with the man's wrist, sending the knife clattering to the ground. The other 2 intruders stumbled back, wide-eyed and stunned. The shorter one yelled, backing toward the door. But panic had already turned to flight. They scrambled to the exit, trying to escape the dread that filled the barn. Ben bellowed, but his voice rattled against the walls rather than them. He had to act fast. In a flash, he darted forward, swinging the bat again, grazing the shoulder of the shorter man as he darted past. The man yelped, and Ben's heart raced with a mix of fear and determination. As they spilled out of the barn into the stormy night, Ben took a moment to catch his breath, leaning against the cold wooden wall. The adrenaline still pumped through his veins, but doubt began to creep in. What if they returned? What if they had friends waiting nearby? Seconds turned into minutes as the rain poured down, the storm raging around him like the chaos in his mind. He took stock of what just happened, the weight of the bat heavy in his hands. He'd fought them off, but the encounter rattled him. Memories of his father teaching him how to stand strong in the face of adversity echoed in his mind. He glanced outside, listening for any sign of the intruders. The pounding rain masked any faint footsteps, but there was something primal in the stillness that told him they wouldn't give up easily. His focus sharpened, and he knew he had to think of a plan to fortify the barn and protect what was rightfully his. Minutes passed, and with a grit determination deep in his gut, Ben returned inside to gather supplies. He pulled out heavy chains and a couple of old locks, ready to secure the doors. He reinforced the hinges with bolts and screws, every movement purposeful. The last thing he wanted was to be caught off guard again. He grabbed the flashlight and positioned it so it would illuminate the barn's entrance if needed. Just as he was finishing, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps nearing the barn once more, whispering voices creeping through the heavy rain. Ben's heart raced. They had returned. With a fierce resolve, he doused the lantern and ducked behind a stack of hay. The barn was dark and he could feel the tension simmering in the air. Hours seemed to stretch as he listened to the intruders muttering outside, plotting their next move. "Let's just go in and grab what we can," one of them whispered. "Yeah, but he's still in there," another voice cautioned, filled with apprehension. Ben's mind raced. Their fear mirrored his own, but he wouldn't show it. He had prepared for this moment, had transformed his barn into a fortress, and he felt a surge of confidence as adrenaline flooded through him again. When the door creaked open and the figures stepped inside, it was his moment to act. He allowed them to walk fully in, then burst from his hiding place, flashlight ablaze, illuminating their surprised faces. He shouted, swinging the bat with controlled precision. The taller intruder stumbled back, nearly tripping over the pitchfork positioned at the side. His voice quaked, uncertainty creeping in. Ben advanced, eyes locked on them. You wanted tools, wanted a way to survive. The air around them crackled with tension. Fear and desperation danced in the echoes of thunder outside. Would they attack again? "I'm just trying to get by," the shorter man blurted, faces pale with realization. Ben replied, both anger and empathy swirling within him. "You think this life is easy?" The intruders exchanged uncertain glances, and Ben took a step closer, lowering his bat but keeping it near. "Zach," the tall one stammered, his voice trembling. "Jack," the shorter one chimed in, stealing another glance at his friend. "I know what it's like to feel backed into a corner, to feel like you need to do something desperate," Ben confessed, the storm raging loud outside but a warmth igniting within. Zach asked, brows knitted together, confusion replaced by curiosity. "I get it," Ben continued, feeling a flicker of hope push through the fear. "Look around. We all have to survive. But there's a way to earn an honest living. Why do this to yourselves?" Speechless, the two intruders blinked, the weight of Ben's words settling heavily on them. Zach echoed again, the fear slipping from his eyes. "Help me with this farm. I'll teach you everything I know. You'll find dignity in work, and there's always a place here for someone willing to earn their keep," Ben offered, feeling the momentum shift. The fear in their eyes was slowly replaced with the glimmering seeds of opportunity. Jack, breathing heavily, hesitantly looked at Zach. "What do we do?" Ben interrupted, determination lacing his tone. "You can turn your lives around together." Silence filled the barn, the echoes of the storm fading into a stillness that seemed almost surreal. In that moment, the choice unfolded before them, not only between desperation and survival, but also between redemption and a new path. With a sigh of surrender, Zach stepped forward. "Okay, we'll do it." "Deal," Ben replied, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The barn, once a battlefield, transformed into a sanctuary of possibility. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside, a seed of change had taken root. Ben felt a wave of relief wash over him as the weight of fear began to lift. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of transformation. Together, they tended to the land, mending fences, planting crops, and finding strength in each other. With every bead of sweat that fell into the earth, Ben's mentorship blossomed, allowing Zach and Jack to discover the pride of work well done. Ben watched them transform from frightened intruders to dedicated workers, their laughter echoing across the fields, mingling with the calls of the birds overhead. Each sunset marked not just the end of the day, but the beginning of new chapters in all their lives. Months passed, and the bond they built grew resilient like the crops they tended. One evening, as twilight settled over the land, Ben sat on the porch, resting for a moment after a long day of work. He watched as Zach and Jack shared stories, their laughter carrying on the wind. Zach shot back with a grin, and with that, the laughter rang out again, filling the space with warmth and camaraderie. In that moment, Ben knew he had transformed an adversarial encounter into something meaningful. He had turned fear into unity, a storm into a source of growth. Life had thrown challenges their way, but here they stood, together, stronger and ready to face whatever came next. As stars lit up the night sky, Ben leaned back on the porch, content to have embraced the journey. They had survived the storm and found purpose through connection, proving that sometimes what feels like an end could truly be a new beginning. In the face of darkness, there was still a chance for hope, redemption, and immeasurable growth. And together, they would weather any storm that came their way. The howl of the wind sliced through the night, sending shivers down the spine of anyone who dared to be outside. In the distance, a storm brewed, dark clouds rolling in like an army ready for battle. But inside the old barn on the edge of Mitchell's farm, Farmer Jack Mitchell was far from worried. He was prepared. He stood in the warm glow of a lantern, his hands steady as they worked on a makeshift barricade at the barn door. Jack, a man of the soil in his mid-50s, had always been one step ahead, especially when it came to the safety of his land. Recently, whispers of intruders, gangs of thieves invading rural farms, had reached his ears, and tonight he felt it in his bones. Something was coming. As the wind rattled the barn walls, Jack tightened the last bolt on the wooden planks. He had stocked up on supplies, everything from tools to food, all fortified within the sturdy walls of his barn. "I've been through rough times before," he muttered under his breath, thinking back to the dust storms and failed crops. He would not let any band of thieves take away what he had fought so hard to build. Just then, a deafening crash echoed through the night, the unmistakable sound of wood splintering against metal. Jack's heart raced as he reached for the old hunting rifle he kept tucked behind a stack of hay bales. "This is it," he whispered, gripping the weapon tightly. He moved quietly toward the barn door, muscles taut and ready. Peeking through a crack, his breath hitched. Two shadowy figures stumbled inside, their faces obscured by balaclavas, but their intentions were clear. Jack felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through him. These weren't just thieves, they were desperate souls driven by something deeper than just greed. One of them shouted, the urgency in his voice cutting through the stillness. Jack kept his grip on the rifle, ready to defend his home, but something about their wild energy rattled him. They were scared, desperate. With each second ticking away, the tension grew. Jack could hear their frantic rummaging amidst the tools. The second man urged. A horrible thought crossed Jack's mind. They were looking for food provisions. He barely managed to keep himself from shouting. Instead, he raised the rifle, steadying his breathing. "You picked the wrong barn," he yelled, making his presence known. The two intruders froze, eyes darting in his direction. For a moment, uncertainty clouded their features. One asked, hesitating on the threshold. "I'm the man who owns this place," Jack replied, channeling all his authority into those words. "And I'm telling you, you need to leave." One of them took a step back, but the other sneered defiantly. Jack felt the weight of the moment bearing down on him like the storm clouds overhead. "You should be," he said, voice like gravel. Just then, a loud clap of thunder rolled through the sky and the intruders flinched. Seizing their moment of hesitation, Jack stepped fully into view, rifle aimed. "I won't ask you again. Get out." The taller intruder chuckled nervously but didn't move. "You're bluffing." Jack's eyes narrowed. "You're taking what isn't yours. You think you can just walk in here like this and steal from hardworking folks." The shorter man moved suddenly, lunging toward Jack. Time slowed as Jack's instincts kicked in. He pulled the trigger bang. The shot echoed like thunder inside the barn, the bullet splintering the wooden beam overhead. Dust fell around them like rain, and the threat of violence evaporated from the air. The intruder stumbled back, eyes wide in realization, fear transforming his bravado into stark terror. He gasped, looking at his partner, who was now trembling. The taller man pleaded, his voice breaking. "We just needed food." Jack lowered his rifle slightly, weighing their pleading against the instinct to finish this once and for all. This wasn't just theft, it was desperation. He could see that now. But there was something deeper at play. They were hungry, scared, and broken. "Tell me your story," he said, his voice firm yet oddly calm. Their faces flickered between fear and bewilderment as they exchanged glances. It was the shorter man who eventually spoke. "My name's Luke," he said shakily. "We're just trying to survive, my family. They're starving." "And I'm Tom," the taller man added. "There's nothing left for us out there." Jack's heart twisted at the desperation in their eyes. He had carved out his life through years of sweat and tears, but he remembered what it felt like to be backed into a corner, to feel like there was nowhere left to turn. "You don't have to choose this life," he said, the weight of their situation pressing on him. Luke's voice was a mixture of disbelief and hope. Jack nodded slowly, lowering his rifle completely. "I won't just throw you out to fend for yourselves. There's enough work to do around here. I'll pay you for it." The tension in the barn began to dissipate, replaced by a tentative understanding. "We'll do it," Tom said, almost hesitant. "Then welcome to Mitchell's farm," Jack replied, relief washing over him. As the storm continued to rage outside, the three of them began to forge an unexpected connection. They patched up a broken fence, planted seeds, and repaired equipment, each day bringing both challenges and shared laughter. Weeks turned into months, and as they worked side by side, Jack watched the transformation in their attitudes. Luke and Tom, once desperate intruders, became reliable hands on the farm. Even as the sun set on long days of hard labor, their camaraderie grew. But just as everything began to settle into a routine, the storm returned. This time, it was not just rain or thunder, but a deafening clash of voices echoing in the distance with sirens blaring. Jack said, halting in his tracks, scanning the horizon. Luke asked, anxiety creeping into his voice. "I don't know, but it sounds serious," Jack replied. The very air felt charged, electric with unspoken dread. The sirens closed in, a convergence of lights and shadows racing toward them, illuminating the barn's dusty exterior. Jack's heart raced as he rushed to gather his thoughts. He commanded, panic clawing at him. They scrambled out of view, ducking behind hay bales and crates as the barn filled with the clamor of sirens echoing through the once peaceful night. The door burst open and shadows flooded in, uniforms glinting under the harsh light. A stern voice called out, "This is the police." Jack's stomach twisted. Not now. He glanced at Luke and Tom, seeing the fear etched on their faces. They had worked so hard to get to this point, and in that moment, Jack realized that the decisions they made now could alter everything. Jack called, stepping forward, raising his hands. The officers exchanged skeptical glances as Jack's heartbeat echoed in his ears. "I hired them to help with the farm," but the officers were not convinced. One of them shouted, pulling out a set of handcuffs. Jack felt the world tilt on its axis as uncertainty and fear washed over him. Would their pasts come back to haunt them? Would they be taken away just as they had begun to build something meaningful? Jack called out, desperate to intervene. "You don't understand." But before he could explain further, the officers moved forward, forcing Luke and Tom to their knees. Jack's heart sank into his stomach as he watched their expressions shift from surprise to sheer terror. "Please." "We didn't mean," Luke started, but the officer interrupted him. "Save it for the station." Jack's blood ran cold, a chill creeping down his spine. He knew he needed to act, to protect these men who had become crucial to his life, but how? "You can't do this. They've been nothing but helpful." But in that moment, the storm outside could be heard crashing louder than ever, as if the entire world had converged into chaos around him. Jack felt the weight of his choices pressing down, intertwining with the emotions swirling in the air. Would he risk everything he had fought for to defend them? Could he find a way to stop this madness before it was too late? Or was he too late to protect those who had trusted him? As the officers prepared to take them away, the door to the barn rattled heavily in the wind, and a flash of lightning illuminated the night, casting jagged shadows upon the walls. With each heartbeat, Jack realized that in the middle of this storm, the real battle had only just begun.